Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. We're going to be exploring a fundamental shift in paradigm in our understanding of consciousness. Before we dive into that program, I want to continue my reflections as I have over the last several days of this extraordinary phenomenon in consciousness that's happening in China and in Iran. I've been talking about how the death of Mahsa Amini in the 16th of September ignited a revolutionary movement in Iran and marked for the first time in modern history where young women, teenagers in their early 20s, ignited a mobilization of consciousness in that country that was the most momentous since the revolution back in 1979. Thousands of people have been arrested. I heard yesterday that one of the things that the security forces have been doing is shooting buckshot into the crowds of young people. And nearly 600 young people have been blinded as a result. And still, the protests continue. Yesterday, in the World Cup, as the United States and Iran battled it out for the make or break game, the United States won 1-0, but the tell of the event was not the game. It was the way the Iranian players responded to the national anthem. They'd been refusing to sing. A number of them mumbled, and the pressure that had been put on them by the regime to their families was that if they didn't behave themselves, the families, as well as the players, would be tortured, imprisoned, and possibly killed. They've been issuing death sentences. And yet, and this is the point, the protests continue. What has been extraordinary is that China has now ignited with the same phenomenon of young people all across China in the biggest protests since 1989 in the Tiananmen Square massacre, where the regime killed hundreds of protesters and put thousands of people in jail. And it's been an extraordinary thing. As you've watched the news, you've probably seen the young people just holding up blank sheets of paper as just a protest against the repression. And what is extraordinary about what's going on in both Iran and in China is it does not appear to be ideological. It's what has been called in Iran a humanistic change of consciousness. All these young people are asking for is the freedom to be themselves. It's not about Marxism, it's not about fascism, it's not about any kind of ideology. It's a simple demand on the part of the Gen Z generation that they have the right to be who they are and to express who they are in simple human ways. In Iran, it was for the young women to not wear the hijab. Mahsa Amini was killed because she didn't have her hijab on correctly. She was beaten to death. And similarly now in China, given the repressions that happened in Hong Kong, as China has consolidated totalitarian force in Hong Kong, the young people are just simply holding up blank pieces of paper. And so how we understand consciousness today, I want to submit, is not simply a personal phenomenon. It's not simply about an individual taking classes and in the luxury of comfortability, thinking about how things change. Consciousness in its most powerful form, changes political structures, changes social norms, changes the historical manifestation of what is true. And so our discussion today is very timely on the change of paradigm because we're seeing it on the streets by young people around the world. And I wanted to just preface this very important conversation in that manner so we understand and can hold as we contemplate the change of consciousness at a quantum level. Let us hold the young people that are showing extraordinary courage in the face of some of the most coercive regimes currently operating in the world today, in Iran and in China. Before we dive into that program, let us pause, as we always do, for our breathing in the midst of all the tumult and the craziness and the escalating turbulence around the world. It's important to breathe. It's important to cultivate coherence in our beings and in our community. So every day, for those of you who are just joining us on Humanity Rising, we breathe together. It's a very simple practice. In a moment, you'll hear the sound of a bell. And when you hear the sound of the bell, just begin to breathe in very slowly for about 5.5 seconds. And then you'll hear another bell. And you breathe out for about 5.5 seconds. And that means you're going to take about 5.5 breaths in a minute and bring in about 5.5 liters of air. It's one of the most effective and quick ways to bring complete coherence to your body in a way that optimizes your body systems and improves your emotional equilibrium, while at the same time enhancing your mental acuity. We'll take 10 breaths together, and then we'll begin our program. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to Humanity Rising. Thank you, everyone. It's so good to breathe together in the spirit of what Plotinus said in ancient Greece, that the whole universe breathes as one. It's my pleasure now to introduce my very good friend and colleague, one of the co-founders of Ubiquity University and Humanity Rising, Peter Merry, who has been our Chief Innovation Officer since the beginning of the company back in 2012, and who has now taken on the additional role as managing director and really the leader of the company and the team as we evolve into the beginning of our second decade as an educational institution. Peter was the one who thought of this particular session. And so, Peter, I turn the program over to you with many thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jim. And yeah, very excited about today's program. So it was a number of synchronicities, which is always the best way for things to happen, in my experience, that led me to meet Ava, who's joining us today. And when we met for the first time at Broughton, at the Broughton Sanctuary in Yorkshire, where we held the Science and Consciousness event this year, the thing that struck me about Ava was, one, his embodiment of what he was talking about. So this wasn't just somebody talking theory, but someone who was clearly, had done the work, and out of the experience had come the concept. And that's always the most impressive way to teach, I believe. And that's showing, as we were discussing beforehand, that the programs that they've developed to reach tens of thousands of people. They have several hundreds of teachers who are now teaching this content. And the thing that struck me was the dedication to proper research, to actually try to find out what really has the biggest impact in terms of increasing human potential, in such a way that the traditional scientific community couldn't just dismiss it as marginal increases, but that was so substantial in its impact that people had to pay attention, basically. And when Ava shared the research and the practice, that's when I invited him to join us at Science and Consciousness at Broughton this year. And it was wonderful to both hear the story and the research and experience some of the practices. In the meantime, I've been trying out the Eye of the Storm course that we'll talk about later, and really a very powerful experience, simple but powerful, which again is often, I think, the best way to provide something simple, powerful, and deep. So great to have you with us, Ava. And thanks for taking the time to join us. And as I understand it, you're going to do a bit of a presentation first. We might do an experience, depending on whether the technology cooperates. And otherwise, we'll just go into having a dialogue around the work that you've been doing. But feel free to say anything more about yourself as well that you'd like people to know. So over to you to start with, and we'll pick it up after your story.
Thank you, Peter. You're very kind. I'm humbled by your presentation. I'm just a practitioner, which happened to also have the background to also study. I grew up in this environment where we were taught as children by our parents, which are both scientists, that you always must find some explanation inside of you, and you have to look for it, not just to believe it or to read about it and to validate it. And this was a very precious message that I took with me in this life of testing, because practically what I shared with you there was results of testing first on myself, and then together with others, putting together methods, and then those methods gave those results. So yeah, I would just say that practice makes the master. Here it's not nothing else from my perspective. I know there are many perspectives in this, but that's mine for the. I would like to share some paradigm shifts that I found very useful for myself, and also when studying the phenomena that we call consciousness, or consciousness that calls all the phenomena. Because for me, consciousness is the source, is not the effect. But that's one of the, I would say, the difficulties in understanding consciousness and studying consciousness. And the first element, we currently look upon understanding the nature of consciousness by mostly rationally analyzing its work, analyzing the effects of consciousness, not the consciousness in itself. That is one of the limitations that I found almost suffocating in the first years of my experimentation and studies, because everything is only reduced to rationality, to the simple logical architecture which we have in mostly in our mind, which is what we call the law of excluded middle. If it is here, it can't be there. If it is there, it can't be here. If it's up, it cannot be down. If it's down, it cannot be up, which we know already. My formation is quantum mechanics, and that's how I think. And those ways of proceeding were completely out of my way of being, because we know already that things are not working like that in the universe, and yet the instruments we're using to study are subjected, practically imbued in this rationality of the middle, the excluded middle. And of course, the question is, if reasoning is one of the, I call it senses, but we can use any, one of the senses of consciousness, how can, using only one sense, one study something so complex? We can't. We limit the possibility. If you only use sound and you want to experience a phenomena, of course you reduce everything to just the vibrations in the spectrum of sound, but there are so many other vibrations in other spectrums, and you need to use other senses for that. And like, for instance, intuition. We don't have a systematic study based on intuition. We only have systematic study based on reasoning. We even analyze data based on logic. But logic is just one of the tools of consciousness, and from my experience, is not even the strongest, not even the best. So I started to look into, is it any possibility to expand, to implement more of these elements, even in the process of study? And the answer is yes, and it gives you amazing possibilities. And I call this the quantum wife perspective, which you know it, but I will share it here. It's an experience that I have myself in life, so to speak, when being in university. One of the best courses that you teach there, and one of my colleagues, a brilliant colleague, was teaching, was this part where you go into the quantum mechanics. And in this respect, they were coming to the lesson where you start to loosen up the logic, and you introduce this quantum logic where yes, no, maybe perspective is simultaneous. And then those students who are there absolutely mesmerized. The class is full of very happy people after the class. My colleague comes back where we were preparing different classes, and he's telling me he was very troubled. And when I asked him, what's your problem, he said, I have a problem home. And then after insisting a little bit, he shared with me that he has a problem, that he thinks that his wife is cheating. A kind of banal problem, one would say. And he was telling me, I'm going to go home now and I'm going to confront her. And I will ask, yes or no? which for me was shocking, because you just mesmerize those students to tell them in so compelling arguments that yes or no is a logic that doesn't even apply to matter in reality, in its profoundness, not to mention to energy and consciousness. And then you go home and you behave so Newtonian, so linked to this simplistic logic. And then that was an experience that showed me something else. We have a very low penetration of the findings in our daily life. For me, this was a shift of paradigm. I realized many times the problem is not what we study, but the problem is the fact that we apply very little in our life in order to discover more of the horizon. So practically, we study maps extensively, we travel little compared with how much we know about the map, and therefore the horizon is not very large compared with how much of the map we know. So that was an element that led me to the following, let's say, shift of paradigm. Consciousness can explore itself. I found it in traditional texts. They call it self-awareness. They call it self-consciousness or self-exploration. And self-exploration is starting to make sense when we start to boost, analogically speaking, the signal of awareness. Otherwise, the awareness oriented on itself, it can't pick up, let's say, the self, the one which is observing itself. I've done these experiments with myself, and then practicing different methods with lots of people, hundreds, thousands of people afterwards, the result is always the same. You just boost the self-awareness. Consciousness starts to discover itself. Now, the consequences are quite spectacular, because improved self-awareness is leading to all the experiences that we call, for instance, non-local intuitions, direct knowledge without reasoning, visions. All these non-local experiences amplify enormously when we boost the self-awareness, and naturally, irrespective to the kind of people are doing that. So it showed to us that this is an innate, this is an inborn capacity. Another, let's say, direction that we took is the fact that we're trying to prove the impact of consciousness over matter, because that's how our instruments, let's say, prove something for the public. So we want to prove the so-called mind over matter. I call it consciousness over matter, because it's not really, mind is just a small part of consciousness, but still we try to prove the impact over matter, and then we try to make the instruments more sensitive in order to detect that impact. When I was doing these experiments, first I came to this intuition, but what if I boost the signal? So instead of building a very sensitive antenna, you boost the signal of the emitter. Emitter in this case is the consciousness itself. Can the consciousness trained impact matter more sensible so that my instrument can pick up that more easy? And the results of the experiments were showing, yes, many, many times more. So that was the root of that experiment that I shared with you there in Broughton, because in this way, increasing the output of awareness, hence self-awareness, we can obtain all this, let's say, impact over even some material phenomena that can be measured afterwards. One of the most spectacular things that we've noticed and measured, and I personally had several experiences like that quantified is self-healing. A consciousness that is starting to, analogically speaking, boost this signal of self-awareness is enhancing the fundamental patterns of our being, which are designed to self-heal. And in this way, the exterior part of our consciousness, which is the body, starts to reharmonize and self-heal. And we've obtained amazing results in situations where people were not even having hopes for it, and still they started to have extraordinary impact in that direction. And I'll share with you some results immediately. And of course, with this impact put out more, another thing that comes, which becomes very spectacular in my opinion, an obvious interconnectedness appear between people without even aiming for it. It's classic already, the fact that when now we have this empathic capacity a little more awakened in our being, we start to be more humane because we understand other people's trouble, other people's sufferance, and we start to become more humane with others. But this is just a slow beginning, I would say. There are even more elements to that, just to mention the fact that when our self-awareness increases 10-15%, is already able to pick up this, let's say, experience of not being limited to yourself. Very often, without knowing anything, just practicing those exercises, which were part of the protocol of the experiment, people, without being told, try to feel the others. They were saying, I don't know what happens to me, but when I enter in a room, I feel part of that ambience spontaneously. Even though, again, the exercise doesn't, the experiment didn't aim for that. And of course,
Ava, just one thing, you know, a lot of the focus is on self-awareness. Could you just say a little bit about what you mean by that? Like when basically the thesis is, you know, if we enhance self-awareness, then we become, you know, much more sensitive to others around us. We create more non-local effects. We have increased self-healing. But what exactly, how do you understand this concept of self-awareness, and what is it you're actually boosting when you talk about boosting that signal?
Well, the capacity to become aware, to be aware, is a property of our consciousness. It's one of its main characteristics. Now, that capacity is spread in a lot of micro directions we are not aware of. We don't realize. We spray awareness in thousands of directions almost simultaneously. Now, the question is, what will happen if you bring that stream in a state of focus? Exactly like a beam of light, which on a surface of 1 square meter, sunlight, 1 square meter is heating up a little bit something. But if you take that 1 square meter of surface of beam of sunlight and you focus it in 1 square millimeter, it burns to 1,200 degrees or something. It can melt plastic, burn heat, burn paper, wood, and so on. So it's the same. It's the same quantity, but it's a totally different quality of it, if you want. So that's we are unable to become aware of ourselves because we're spread in too many directions exterior. Yeah. Now, I heard that long ago when I was 18, 17, actually. And I was curious. My first experiments was with that. What will happen if I gather for real, all my attention in one spot. I did experiments and I realized even subconsciously, we have jerks, we have boosts of attention in all kinds of directions, which we are not even acknowledging. They happen in fractions of a second. Modern studies are showing that. But we don't devise a method to bring that into a coherent focus. But I did classic exercises of focusing to significant results. One of the goals was to give that capacity to focus, let's say 10 minutes, without one stray thought appear in the horizon of my awareness. What will happen then? What happens then is that almost laser beam awareness can then, when it's so stable, turn to the source. That's self-awareness. We have glimpses of it, and sometimes in privileged moments it can happen. Like, for instance, if you get a overwhelmingly intense state from a plant, from a shock. Some people have a shock and they say, suddenly all my thoughts disappear, all things were suspended. Correct. And then suddenly you acknowledge, I am, with no other attributes to it. It's a state of pure knowledge and all that. And yeah, but then it can be obtained, it can be created by this, first of all, bringing together the focus and turn it into its source. That's what becomes intense, significant self-awareness. Otherwise, of course, we try, what am I doing here? I'm talking to you. I'm aware, but I have to say something. And in the moment I formulate my next sentence, I lose track of myself. I am the one talking. And then I'm just aware of the significance of the talk that I'm having there, but I lose the I in the process. Yeah. Unless the focusing is so strong, I can keep it on myself, on the I, while I'm performing various actions. But that implies a certain basic training.
So this practice of focusing attention, which I know is such a core part of
initially
teaching,
it's a focus of attention.
That's a way to get to the self-awareness, is it? Because you say once that gets to a certain intensity, it then like mirrors back on the self. Exactly. So the first it's being aware of our attention and being able to kind of channel it. And then it becomes being aware of being aware, I guess.
Who's aware? You become of who is the source of awareness. Now, you see, the problem with these things, and that's where meditation appears, actually, spontaneously. Meditation is a state that appears spontaneously when focusing is uninterrupted. It's not a state, you can't jump over these steps and say, I'm meditating. No, you can say you meditate, but actually meditation is a spontaneous state that appears within the consciousness, is the state in which consciousness is not occupied by anything else but the object of the meditation, which could be whatever you choose, an idea, a word, a mantra, a flame of a candle, but there are no other jumps around, no content around. But to obtain that state of no other content, so the eye shines alone there, so it becomes obvious, which is just a training, because after a while you don't need it. The space of consciousness can be repopulated with thoughts and concepts because the eye is already shining in the middle. Exactly as when you look for an object first time in a room, and you look around and you oversee the object all the time because you didn't process it yet. But if somebody show you, look, that's the object you look for, from that moment on, you can never miss it. It's always there. Yeah, it's exactly the same process. Once you find out the I, you don't lose it very easy in the full of objects mirror of your consciousness there. But first you have to make a little bit of silence so you recognize it. Oh, so this is good. Now I know it's a similar process. It's much more profound in a way. And in this way, once you get there, the signal of, I call it signal to make it more friendly with modern science. They don't call it in ancient texts like that. But the signal becomes much stronger. And that is when very special, let's say, results appear. Like, for instance, this, as I mentioned, self-healing. Yeah. So that's
great. Thanks. I mean, maybe before we go on to some of the other questions that are popping up, you can just summarize a bit what the experiment was and some of the outcomes of the research, and then we can kind of jump into some of the other related questions.
Yeah. So we did the following type of experience. A group of people. There were two groups: the witness and the active group. They were given a certain series of techniques for every 49 days. So they took a batch of 49 days and they do techniques, and they are told what to focus on. So it's the technique, methodology, and what do you aim with that technique. Yeah. So, and they go for 49 days. The measurements are happening in the end of each week. And then that's one stage. Stage 2, again, description of techniques, description of the goals, and then off you go. 49 days, and so on, 5 stages. Of course, they are designed on purpose to lead the people through certain experiences which are actually discovering the structure of your own consciousness, activating the inborn capacities. But it's still very useful like this. So this was 5 stages, 49 days each. We were recording the EEG of each participant for 1 hour. And the goal was to activate with alpha waves the entire brain capacity. And as we know, normally we have consciously access to a part of it. The rest remain, even if you try to relax, to close your eyes, to think positive and all that, part of your structure remains active and does whatever it needs to do in order to maintain physiological processes, to cope with emotions, do whatever you have there on your plate. And then there is a conscious part which you access consciously. And then we took a 1 hour period in order to make sure there's not something that appear because you took some position or do something, because things like that happen. But in 1 hour, you can't keep things in order unless you are in that state. So for 1 hour a recording, and then the goal was put your entire brain capacity in a state of alpha entirely. And then the results in the beginning were kind of exactly like normal results that we know from so many other studies. But then after the first stage, the percentage of access consciously to the brain capacity increased. And it didn't increase to 3%. It increased to double, which, yeah, that already is beyond the margin of instrumentation, beyond the protocol of experimentation, and so on. So the experiment was designed in order to prove that this kind of exercising and that kind of looking upon the consciousness will give you access to your innate possibilities. And then, for instance, initially, the group average to access of the brain capacity was 5.2%, which is no surprise. There was a slight difference. The control group in the beginning was 4.8%, but we put that on the fact that the other ones were stretching a little bit, were trying, because they knew they are part of the experiment. So even though we said just relax and you know, you say that, but somehow inside of you, you influence it a little bit. That's how it happens normally. But in the end of the fifth stage, the group average of access the brain capacity in this protocol was 15.7%. This is 3 times more. Now, already, this is very, very good. The control group was also around 4.8, 4.7%. But what is very interesting, we have in this group of experiment, for instance, people who are practicing from no experience, they just heard about it, to people who are having 25 years of experience in this kind of practices. We extracted from that group a subgroup which were 15 years plus experience, because we noticed that the results are very different, very, very different. So in the subgroup of 15 plus years of experience, we have in the beginning, starting with, they have 77.3% access. So they already have much more than usual. But in the end, this subgroup was at 24.7% in average. Their access to, which gives you a completely different view in life, gives you a completely different perspective on basically anything you're doing.
Say something about how their experience changed as they moved from having access to 5% of the brain capacity to accessing 25%. I mean, what did they notice was different in their experience?
Here are some, that was what I was, 75% of the group experienced increased moments of what we call it the non-local consciousness. For instance, clear intuitions. We asked them to keep notes of this kind of things. When from you know who is calling you, the simple thing, to this kind of intuitions. For instance, I need to start doing this because this will appear on my job. And then 2 weeks later, exactly with the words that happened. And they have it written down. This kind of non-local experiences, which all 75% of the group, they were having documented this kind of things, lots of them, which of course that gives or intuitions, visions, or empathic experiences. Empathic experiences were even more often. Feeling connected with people they don't even know, but they knew them. They knew them in some mysterious way, for them mysterious because it was nothing rational, but they knew. And then through dialogue and through knowing those people, they realized, my goodness, it's exactly what I already knew about that person. Which and again, in this group, there were people really not into this kind of visionaries and so on. People working with science, accountants, or like people who don't dwell in this kind of experiments. And some were even not troubled, but surprised. They were saying, what's going on with me? Is this exercise is making you a little bit nuts? That there was the kind of, which shows exactly that they were objective in their appreciation. 45%, for instance, of the group experienced a non-material connection with the surrounding. Like I mentioned before, they started to feel ambience. They started to realize, for instance, processes in their physiology that is connected to the environment. They knew when the weather is changing. They knew all kinds of things that have absolutely no physiological, I say, they are not aware of these kind of things normally. That indicate that they started to look. Over 90% experience deeper understanding of themselves. Basically, all the group, they said, I know enormously much more about myself now, about my emotions, about my real motivations inside, about how things work inside. People were surprised to see how many things they have behind the curtain, so to speak, running in their daily life. And even situations like, for instance, I took that decision, and now I see so many layers of that decision in my life, how many conditionings I have had to take that decision. I thought I'm free, and I said I took that decision just by myself, and now I see, yeah, it was basically a robotic thing.
Mm-hmm.
And
so I mean, the kind of suggestion then is that when we're just operating in our rational mind, which most of humanity does, we're only really accessing 5% or so of the brain's capacity. And
well,
even when you
this
start
is
to expand, even when you start to expand that to, you know, and add 10% to that, we start to get non-local effects that aren't explainable by traditional materialist science.
What is fascinating, I know lots of people who've been starting to do this, of course, compelled by other reasons, but who are what I call the modern autism. They're not diagnosed as autists, but they are also not very human friendly, so to speak. They live a kind of an isolated life. And when starting to work in this way with their own consciousness, they started to feel part of the world. They started to integrate. You know, the relation to the world is not anymore through differences, through separations, but through, and this is a natural mechanism inside of our consciousness. At the inferior levels, where we have reasoning, for instance, we always relate to differences. That's how any information we process in comparison with something else. But actually, there is another part of our consciousness that is not operating in this way. It's operating with resemblance and unifying different concepts into larger concepts.
Well, not just a part of it, seemingly like 95% of it. Operating in a different way, right?
No, because we reduce everything. That's my opinion. That's also why we have reduced that much of the usage, because we were only jumping into the reasoning, and then suddenly everything else disappeared for us. Actually, it's just as that saying goes, the way you see the problem is actually the problem. So, yeah, that's...
I mean, can you share a little bit about just in a summary, the kind of exercises you were giving people to do during the project?
Yeah. So, just to give example, how it was structured, the first phase. 30 minutes of some yoga postures, selected those yoga postures that are increasing the capacity to focus. More than that, when they were doing those yoga postures, they were also given a task to concentrate inside during the posture. So they say, for instance, you sit in this position, concentrate in the middle of the forehead. You sit in that position, concentrate in the middle of the throat, in the middle of the chest, or concentrate on the position of the arms in relaxation. It's all kind of, let's say, concentration task, which is not a random, of course, but I would not enter too many details in that. So 30 minutes of such body postures, followed by 30 minutes of a simple breath in the beginning, a breathing exercise, which is known as the square breath. It's a breath in which the breathing in, holding breath, breathing out, holding breath, they are equal in length. That's why it's called the square breath. It's a very simple way of breathing, but what does to our capacity to focus is it's absorbing very well the parasite thoughts, so to speak. So after a while, your attention can rest only on that square. It's not a visual square, on that process that you have there, for many reasons. But anyway, it's designed for that. after a while, so this was first phase, second phase, then they move on. The breath becomes a little more complex because we aim to move a little bit the limit of their focusing. Then another 30 minutes, so 30 minutes postures, 30 minutes square breath, and 30 minutes of visualization exercise, because the consciousness also need the active phase. So you rest your consciousness on breath, for instance, relax completely, and you, in this way, all the parasitic actions of your consciousness are dissipating. But then you are moving into the active phase, because one of the big problems that we have normally is that the active phase is disturbing the waters, so to speak. We can't remain active and relaxed in the same time. And the active phase was also the most intense practice is when you visualize an object. With the eyes closed, they pick an object. We chose something very simple, a ping pong ball, because it's the simplest you can imagine. And they close their eyes after they see it, and they aim to recreate on the screen of their consciousness there inside the exact image of what they saw there. Many people say, but this is banal, I will do it very easy. And the shock is afterwards, because after a few seconds, the image turned into a banana, your mind jumps around, you think of your shopping list or whatever else, you come back, you resume, and actually, even to obtain 3-4 minutes of perfect visualization, stable, without any other parasite thoughts to steal your attention, just 3-4 minutes, it takes some training. It's not that easy, though it's our instrument. There's nothing, nobody is in there disturbing the waters. It's only us. Imagine that happens millions of times there every day. So then people become aware of this process. They start to see, that's what it is. 30 minutes of this training, and then they do 60 minutes of an exercise known in yoga as Laya Yoga, where they focus on a process of tuning with a certain subtle sound. They focus on a subtle sound, a mantra. Some know what it is, a mantra. It's the prefiguration of a subtle sound that you repeat, and then you are aiming to perceive that which is transferred through this word, which is not a word with a significance that you call a mantra. And then, so this is a program that they were doing every day, and these were the results. Yeah. The condition to participate to the experiment was that you don't skip more than 1 day to do this program. And many people kept it.
So it was like 2.5 hours of practice, as you described, for just under 250 days, 245, or was it something like that? Yeah. Wow, that's pretty intense, but with pretty remarkable results. Well,
we couldn't, we didn't want, and we run this experiment several times. We didn't want to do it more, because you can also do 10 minutes of practice every day. But we noticed that the significant results appear only after much longer time, measurable results. We wanted to show that, look, in fact, this is what you can do even faster than in 10 years. Yeah.
You said the
also for practical reason.
You said the average of the advanced group by the end of it was 26%. Did you have any outliers who were kind of up in, beyond 50% or something? And if
we
so,
have.
If
we
so,
have
how
60,
did their experience
70,
change?
90% we have.
Okay, wow, 90%.
And
of
in
brain
this
time.
respect, you need to consider that previously this kind of, with a similar protocol, the best results obtained was meditators with 20 plus 30 years of experience, 33%. And these people were not having like 25 years of experience like in a monastery. No, I mean, they did practice, but like 1-2 hours per day, some yoga exercises, some breathing, some meditation techniques, but they were not like hardcore practitioners
So like
and
if
yet
people were getting 80-90%, how was that affecting their experience of reality?
Immensely. I mean, a person who is in that state describes the following thing: when I look back to myself and my life, I was asleep. That's what the description, or in various ways. I don't think I was alive before, or and then of course, you see, the problem with these elements is that the process when our self-awareness is more intense doesn't stick out. It's exactly like nature around us. Nature around us is so perfect, but its perfection is so balanced that it doesn't stick out. We are used to appreciate things only out of balance. The beauty of nature doesn't slap you on the face. Why? Because it's everywhere and it's so perfect. We only are used with exceptional things, and this is one of the problems I've noticed in myself. I have had amazing results, but every time when I was having those amazing results were normal for me. Absolutely normal. I mean, why? Because my inner perspective is moving together with those results. It's not like you take a drug or you take some plants. It is true. When you take a plant, you in few minutes shift your perspective, and that's why it's so extraordinary. To give you also an example, many of these people, me included, I was part of the experiment, for instance, every time. And one of the things that I can tell you is that, and shared with many participants, they tried ayahuasca, they tried things, because like everybody who is curious have tried things. Exactly the states on the highest ayahuasca trip I used to have every day now, but without taking more than a tea.
Well, it's what Ken Wilber would distinguish as a state experience or stage development. He says you can have a state experience through taking some kind of drug or plant medicine or whatever it is, but then you drop back to where you were before, maybe slightly, with some more information or a bit more open-minded or something. But to be able to regularly access a state of consciousness through your own practice without any stimulus from outside requires stage development. Requires you to actually, work through, and that's hard work, right? Through stages to get to the place where, you can then at will access these different states, right?
Yeah, that was my always my goal. I'm not interested in states. And that's what we are teaching also participants and students now. We say, listen, if you are hunting for states, there are much easier ways. This one is not for you. If you just want to have an experience, there are all kinds of systems that give you an experience. This is a transformation, and transformation transforms you, your inner perspective, and you are there for the rest of your existence in any form. So,
one of the things, Ava, when I started doing the Eye of the Storm practice with the candle, right? You have to try to focus your attention on the candle. One of the kind of questions that emerged for me, and I've noticed a couple of references to this kind of thing in the chat as well, is, the time I get intuitive insights, let's say, which are often very informative and, have a big impact in my life, is not so much when I'm focused, but when I'm kind of in a slight dream state, or just waking up in the morning or something, and then you get this really clear intuition or insight that drops in, that seems to almost be the opposite energy of than focusing on something. So how do you see the relationship between those kind of, that what seems to be a more expanded consciousness, where at which point the intuitions and insights drop in, versus this very focused practice on something?
It's exactly like the relationship between the feminine and the masculine, the yin and the yang. Both of them, they create totality. One is a resourceful relaxation, if you want, where you are just like a satellite dish that is picking up a far galaxy. Yeah, but the satellite dish need to have a very good mechanism of orientation. Otherwise, you can pick up all kind of crap. So, and this is what I've noticed from experience. This, in the first place, it was my experimentation while I was a student in university studying quantum mechanics and other things. And I was like intrigued by the fact, what would happen if I push the boundaries to control the instrument first? And then when you control the instrument, you can maintain that state of receptivity until you get the results. Because as you know, we don't pick up when we measure a far distance cosmic phenomena. You need to keep the dish oriented in that direction, or the mirror oriented in that direction for a very long time. And if the mechanism is wobbling or is totally synchronized, it doesn't collect enough photons to have a picture of that phenomena, which is so faint.
It reminds me a bit of when I was doing my research into evolution theory. I just had this image of the tree that, you know, it says to send your branches higher, you have to send the roots deeper. And it's like you have to learn to, the more that you learn to focus on a specific, the more the expanded consciousness can grow. It's like they go hand, like they seem to be opposites, but they're actually intrinsically connected to each other.
They are entangled.
Entangled.
They are entangled because they proportionally influence each other. This is what we found. It's like the more you are, let's say, in control of the mechanism, the more you can use the instrument better.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, like if you have a very complex tool, but you can't use it because you don't control, you don't have the skills, you will use that tool, though a phenomenal tool, in a very little creative way. Even if you have some artistic inspirations that are amazing, you can't do it. You can't make the wood, for instance, the woodwork with that instrument in such way as a master does. But that person was training to use that tool in the most extraordinary, skillful ways first. That's the barrier I found, which is kind of surprising because it's not a big deal. Still, it's blocking the going out because we can't put it down, so to speak. We can't tame it down.
There's just to pick up a couple of questions from the chat that have been coming through. One, like, you know, somebody asked early on here, why do we need to do science on this? Don't we all just know it kind of intuitively anyway? So why bother with the kind of, I have an answer to that, but I'm sure you do as well.
The way I see it is that science is another approach on spirituality, on life. And today we are more inclined to it as a result of all kinds of visions we have about ourselves, about life itself. And practically science, let's face it, replaced religion. Religion lost many of its methods. It became ineffective. Science came in with a very big noise and promises. Oh, we can show you the whole secrets of the universe. Now science is in a big trouble because it's trying to cut the branch on which it was sitting, basically, because it goes itself into all kind of paradoxical situation. And then, of course, I would say it's not only saving ourselves. Of course, we know these things intuitively. But science brings something very valuable, in my opinion, back to spirituality. It brings the method.
Mm.
Spirituality, when it lost science, it became religion.
Mm.
That
Like
was the problem.
take it on faith, basically.
Well, even faith can be studied. Faith is an energy. You can amplify it in your being.
No, what I mean is it's an interesting point when you say when spirituality lost science, it became religion. Yeah. And in religion, you just have to take it on faith because the priest, or now in this case, the guru tells you it's so. Whereas when you
how about believe in science? How about the slogan I heard these years to saturation, which I couldn't believe I will hear in my lifetime? Believe in science. Whoa. Yeah. Welcome back to the Middle Age.
Yeah,
just
right.
that you replace the science. Since when science has to be believed? No, it's on the contrary.
It brings in the inquiry to really try to study, what actually happens when we do these different things, which doesn't have to be either or, science or spirituality. Precisely the combination can be, very powerful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The systematic approach. We have, for instance, a deviation, even in spirituality today, a deviation towards experimentation, not as Ken Wilber call it the stage shift. No. Why? Everybody is hunting for a state. I hear people saying, I have a state of enlightenment. Good luck. Did you generalize it? No. Well, it was in 1974. Excellent. I'm happy for you. But the problem is, it's a state. Yeah. And science brings back the spirit of how did you get there? Can we recreate that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
That's, the uniqueness of spiritual experiences is becoming a trap also.
Mm-hmm.
I had an intuition, I had a vision. Yes, but that is also the result of a process. And since it is a process, you can recreate it. It can become a part of your daily life.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm saying science is necessary today, even for spirituality.
Yeah. Just another one from up here. Dahan is saying, did you make any connection to the energy of love in the experiments? How would you see the relationship between what you were discovering and what we might call love?
Well, we did many other things, but this was related to the most simple elements. Energy of love. Any form of energy becomes available in our being in a quantity that is far greater than we can imagine when the instruments that we have in our consciousness are controlled, are in our control. Like, for instance, when you experience love and your subconscious is full of all kinds of traumas and stuff, you don't have access to it because the 5%. And because of that, you go there in the state of love, but there is a voice there sabotaging you and saying, you know how it will end. All the tears and all the problems, and you're not capable or whatever. Yeah, that's the reality. But when you expand your access, you naturally see, wait a second, it is me loving. I'm not depending on the other one to love me back. It is me, the source of love. And then suddenly the whole issue with loving and do you love me, it's solved. You are the one loving. It's one of the simple discoveries that people do by themselves without even being taught that.
Mm-hmm. And does that relate to other emotions as well in the same way?
Yeah. Not only that, but for instance, when we love, the capacity to become self-aware is increasing naturally. Yeah. Like, for instance, one of the stages of this kind of experimentation, we introduce in the 4th and 5th stage the following thing: love yourself for doing this exercise. Immediately, the efficiency of the exercise increases, even though you might say, what's that? It's just an attitude inside of you. It shouldn't influence the result, but it does.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Would you make a distinction? Catherine suggests that consciousness and love are the same thing. Would you distinguish those?
In the following way, love, from what I've studied and what we have been in this group, very large group studied, is like this: love, compassion, forgiveness, intelligence, all of them are properties, characteristics, or attributes of consciousness. So consciousness, when in its manifestation, have attributes, exactly as, you have a flame and it's a complex phenomena, but it has heat, it has light, it has shape, it has different characteristics. Mm-hmm. That's why I was saying in the beginning that studying consciousness, we need to look at its characteristics. Love is one of its characteristics. It's characteristic to consciousness to manifest as love. Mm-hmm. So that's why you can say, from this perspective, love is consciousness. Forgiveness is consciousness. Balance is consciousness. We wouldn't even have the possibility to conceive a state of balance. How do you define balance? It's such a clear thing to us, and it's so elusive. It's so impossible to define it. And yet, balance is a characteristic of our consciousness. Mm. We know it. Love, how do we know how to love? Everybody define love in their way, yet we know we are in love. Nobody taught us. I mean, mother, father, love, and all these things, it was kind of part of the environment, and yet we know exactly how to recognize it. So I would say it's a characteristic of our consciousness, of consciousness generally. So as a characteristic, you can't separate. You cannot say love is something, consciousness is something. Exactly as you say, the light of this flame and the flame are one. And still, light is a characteristic of the flame.
And have you found effects of this practice on helping people transform trauma and things from the past?
From simple things, like, for instance, fear of darkness and this kind of, I would say, banal, to even very profound traumas, like this kind of disturbing phobias or habits that they can't get rid of it completely. It's very easily they get washed out together with other things. Because here we don't go, analogically speaking, you don't drill to take out a poisonous root from the ground. You just eliminate the whole strata there. And then, everything comes out. Some of the things you didn't even know they are there. You just see how they just evaporate there.
So say a little bit more about how do you see that working? What's going on when you do the practices you've described, and these traumas just seem to evaporate? What's actually happening?
Well, I will describe something simpler. It happened some years ago. I was contacted by an association, anti-smoking association, with a request to give them some results and some exercises to help some people who need to quit smoking. And then I was asking them, why do you approach us? Because we have absolutely nothing to do with smoking. And they say, but you have people we were trying to help for 15 years. They came to one of these programs, and in few weeks they quit smoking. And we were trying for many, many years. So we would like to, collaborate. And for me, what was shocking was not the fact that it's effective, but the fact that we never even put the problem. I didn't know what to answer on the spot. Then we went and reverse engineered the process. It's true. It happens like that. And what happens is that part of the things is that people learn to focus the attention inward, attention that is improved through exercise, and they breathe consciously. When you breathe consciously, you uproot any parasitic association with the process of breathing, including the smoking. You simply uproot it. It's deleting the lines there. Everything is format C of the hard disk.
How is breath having that effect?
No, it's not breath in that particular thing. It's the fact that breathing in that situation it was also part of the smoking. And while they were breathing consciously, even if they tried, because then we spoke with people and they say, yeah, I tried once or twice mechanically. I didn't even know. I put the cigarette in my mouth and it felt horrible. It was not something that we told or something. We didn't even mention it in any form. But the fact that they were aware of themselves and the fundamental structure that we have, the design, the intelligent design that we have, which doesn't allow us to do bad things to ourselves, to think bad things and so on, is making them able to eliminate that immediately. So that's why.
So you kind of restore people to the natural state.
Exactly. They restore themselves to the natural state.
Yeah.
And the breathing process, it is true. The breath itself is an expression, one of the most direct expressions of consciousness. So for this reason, it works like a charm. In a similar way, based on the same mechanism, when performing such exercises with the attention focused upon yourself, and again, being told exactly how do you perform, how you operate in consciousness, because it's not an exercise outside of you, it's an exercise in your consciousness, but the physical body and other things are helping. That goes in such way that is slowly bringing the consciousness deeper and deeper beyond the usual threshold that is the separation between conscious and subconscious, so to speak, or unconscious, if you want even deeper. So simply it's expanding your awareness. And then expanding it, simply you bring back to light all those things. And this is what a therapy today is a guided awareness. Well, instead of having guided awareness, you have just awareness, which is exposing to the light of day, not day, but consciousness, all kind of things simultaneously. This is the good part. Otherwise, it's exactly, guided awareness is like drilling. You want to find something there and you drill after it. Somebody guides you there, you arrive there, you extract that to the light of awareness. When you see it, it's gone, because usually it's a minor thing. It's something you misunderstood in your childhood, or who knows what happened there across your life. And then you allow afterwards unconsciously to attach all kind of other patterns and memories and things. And usually it's a big cluster there around. When you extract its core, everything else in few hours dissolve, or sometimes few days, few sessions, and so on. But that's one thing. As I used to tell to the students, imagine that instead of teaching you fishing, so you go with the fishing rod and take out one fish, you have a net, a huge net. You catch all the fish, all the whales, even if you have a good net.
So basically, what you're saying is, in a way, the light just shines straight into the shadow, and then because the light is there, the shadow isn't there, right? And then everything that's there is transformed or released.
It's transforming. It's alchemized, as some goes and say. It's a process that happens spontaneously, and you don't take it one by one. Yeah.
Very cool. Hey, we need to start wrapping up. Just one last point from my side. The reason this is also so heartening is, as people who've heard me rant on before on Humanity Rising know, is that it's my sense that the essence of our challenge as human beings right now is that we've forgotten the nature of our interconnectedness, right? We've fallen into this illusion that we're separate, and therefore if I do something to you, or I do something to the planet, or I do something to some other life form, that it somehow doesn't affect me, right? And if we hadn't forgotten the intrinsic nature of our interconnectedness, then we could never have done what we've done to the planet and to each other. So when you say, as we start to expand our access to our brain beyond the 4 or 5%, then the primary phenomena is an increased felt sense of interconnectedness with everything. So if interconnectedness is the core problem, or the lack of it is the core problem at the moment, being able to do these kind of practices that, return to us that sense of interconnectedness is not just nice for our personal development or experience, but potentially essential to, humanity being able to survive and thrive into the future on this planet with the rest of life.
I call it the lesson of the day. I mean, we're not by coincidence facing all kinds of hardships in life. The planet is facing, humanity, planet is finite, in my opinion, but us are facing this challenge of togetherness. And will it surprise you if I would tell you that I found ancient texts that are saying the following? I'm approximately quoting: the highest rapid spiritual experience for a human being is togetherness. It's one of the most profound teachings that exist on the planet. And they were saying that thousands of years ago. But of course, one of the difficult parts is to sit. It's also called the most elusive human experience. Just togetherness. They say not togetherness for this reason or that reason, just the togetherness.
Beautiful. That's a really good place for us to kind of wrap up, Ava. Also, just so you know that after this, there is what they call the after chat, where people just get together and they can all actually be together and discuss the conversation and things. And you're very welcome to join that if you want. I know the link was in your mail, and I'm sure there we are. Stan has just put the link in again. So you're very welcome to join. And in that point, everybody can contribute and discuss. So, for people who are interested in finding out more about the work that Ava does with the Institute of Quantum Transformation, we've partnered with them at Ubiquity, and I just put a link, and so did Jim, into the chat that takes you to the page about the Eye of the Storm online course, which anybody can take. And then if you want to find out more, that links through to the page on their site as well, where you can follow that program, but also follow, there's lots of in-person programs they run around the world as well. As I said at the beginning, more than 700 teachers trained now in this practice. So it's starting to have a really big impact and get traction, which is very, very good news, given the kind of impact that it's having in the world. So just real gratitude to you, Ava, for what you're doing, the contribution.
Thank you
you're
also
making.
for what you are doing, because it is the other part of the bridge.
Yeah, thank you. But wonderful work, and anything we can continue to do to support you. I know we're working on that with Mattia and the team, so we'll keep doing what we can to let people know about it. And
what I say is the best help we can do today is to transform ourselves in significant, noticeable ways.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Great place to leave it. Thank you so much. And
thank you also.
Back to Jim.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Ava. Thank you, Peter. This has been a marvelous discussion. And I know we have to bring it to a close, but I want to ask your perspective, Ava, on one thing about consciousness. And I'm referring to Anarika Govinda's book, The Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism. As you know, he was a great Tibetan Buddhist scholar. And he says that in the Tibetan tradition, which has studied consciousness probably as deeply as any other culture in history, they defined consciousness as a combination of awareness and memory. And I wonder, in your own research, what role does memory play in awareness? Or does that not factor at all?
Yeah.
Because it's a very profound notion.
Absolutely. But there are, how to say, if you look at memory and awareness, they are even more. They add, even in the Buddhist tradition, they add some functions more. Memory, the reasoning capacity, awareness, they are different limbs of consciousness when it's in its manifestation. So absolutely, more than that, in my opinion, we have a very big problem of memory today. I didn't want to get started on that, but we did also some
we'll have
research.
You back for that.
Because, and I'm not talking about memory of the memory of facts. I'm talking about memory of states, memory of emotions, all these aspects of life. And that's the reason why we repeat mistakes. What's the cause of somebody who understands something act as if they never understood that? It's the memory problem. We do not have access to important things online, so to speak, live. We remember it afterwards. Oh, I should have not. Come on, I said I will never do that. What's that? Why did you not remember it in the moment there when you were about to do it again? Or the positive aspect, when you were supposed to, and actually that memory itself is a characteristic of consciousness and is blocked in its functioning by certain even bad habits that we have today, which I'm not going to enter now. But there are a lot of things that jam its mechanism. And they jam it so much that at some point, some people don't have access to any memory. And we call it a disease. And as we discovered today, people who lost memory, actually the memories are intact. What is damaged is the access point.
Yeah.
So,
listen,
I think it's a very important element.
So much. Definitely would like to have you back. So maybe, Peter, you and I can confer with Ava, because this is a very deep and rich domain that you're bringing to our attention. Ava, this whole year in Humanity Rising has been dedicated to inner regeneration. We've taken the position that, given the escalating hypercomplexity and turbulence of the world, the most important thing we can do at Ubiquity, and we can do at Humanity Rising, as you've done today, is to focus our attention on how each and every one of us can deepen and fortify our internal capacity, awareness, consciousness, compassion, so that we can more successfully navigate a very chaotic world and bring the kind of elegance and inspiration that the world needs through what we do. So inner regeneration and the fortification of consciousness is really at the heart of what Humanity Rising is seeking to do.
We are very much aligned.
Yes,
Jim,
so
can I just say
deep alignment.
Can I just say one thing for people who aren't on the chat here, who are following this on streams or YouTube or whatever? If you just go to the Ubiquity University site, ubiquityuniversity.org, then one of the banners on the homepage has the link through to the Eye of the Storm program. So if you weren't able to see the link we put in the chat here, then you just have to go to the Ubiquity University page and you'll find the banner there.
Yeah, that's where we want to be, everyone, in the eye of the storm. It's a great course, recommended to everyone. Thank you, Ava. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was very nice to meet you.
That brings us to a close for today. You're welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the link in the chat box, and we'll see you all tomorrow. We'll be going to Auroville, India tomorrow for a discussion from one of their teachers on integral regression therapy, another approach to animating consciousness. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.